welcome to a Casual Cincast bonus episode powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris.
My name is Mike.
And my name's Justin. The name that you just heard for the show was Casual Cincast, which is probably unfamiliar to regular listeners. And to new listeners, you probably don't care. But yeah, we changed the name of the show. We were previously Casual Cinemedia. And we all felt that the Cinecast label fit better because we are a podcast. Cast being the key word.
Exactly. So hopefully going forward, this won't need to happen again. But thank you so much for your patience with us. Going forward, we will be Casual Cinecast.
Okay, yeah, so enough of that. And Mike, do you want to give us a rundown of the show?
All right, and today we'll be going over the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far, and then we'll be diving into our thoughts and predictions for the Avengers Infinity War. So
yeah, pretty exciting. I know Justin's thrilled about this episode. He's over here just like
Justin begged
the
us
bit.
to do this episode.
Yeah.
Yep. It was all my idea. I love it. So excited.
So in case you haven't realized, Justin's not that big a Marvel fan. Justin, do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship with the Marvel Cinematic Universe so far?
Yeah, sure. I will kick us off here. So prior to doing this podcast, I just realized, like, while researching all the Marvel films that have come out, I was on a pretty good roll of not watching Marvel movies. Prior to, I guess, probably like a month ago, I finally broke down and watched Thor Ragnarok, but before that, the last Marvel film I had watched was Guardians of the Galaxy, which came out in August of 2014.
And were you a fan of that at the time?
I was. I thought it was pretty good. And I think when I had watched that one, I actually hadn't seen Thor 2 or The Winter Soldier yet, because I was not a fan of the first Avengers movie or Iron Man 3, really, and or the first Thor. Now that we're going into it. So I skipped over Thor Dark World. I skipped Captain America Winter Soldier, but Guardians of the Galaxy kind of looked like a change of pace, like a different feel to it. So right. I did go and see that, and it was pretty enjoyable. I like Chris Pratt, you know.
He is charming.
Yeah, so that one was working for me, but the other ones, like when Ultron came out, it kind of looked more on pace with what had come previously that I didn't like.
Yeah, if you didn't like the first Avengers, there's no way I would imagine you would like Age of Ultron.
Yeah. So you guys doing the podcast to convince me to watch Thor Ragnarok, which we can get into how I felt about that in a second. But since then, to catch up for Infinity War, you guys have told me that I needed to watch not only Captain America Civil War, but also, if I could, Age of Ultron. And I have watched both of those. So there's still several that I'm missing: Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Homecoming. But I've caught up a little bit, I guess, on like the main story. So that's kind of where I sit now.
Yeah, so a little known secret is the whole reason when I came to Justin with the idea to do a podcast, the whole reason I did that was so that I could slowly torture him by forcing him to watch Marvel movies. And so far it's working out like gangbusters.
Everything's going according to plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, that's where I'm at. We can get into thoughts later. Do one of you guys want to talk about where you're at with Marvel? Or
So I think you and I were both probably at the same Iron Man screening in 2008.
Yeah, I was there too.
Oh, yeah, Chris was there too.
You know what's remarkable about that? We've known each other for a very long time. Looking at Iron Man, the first one at 2008.
That's probably around the time that we all started going to movies together.
Yeah, that was that summer.
I actually remember when I first started working at Blockbuster, I actually told Chris about this badass new movie that I had just seen that changed my life called Children of Men. And it was coming out on DVD soon. And I was like, oh, it's so good. It's amazing. You got to watch it. And then you did. And I remember I was like, I came to work and I was like, did you see it? What'd you think? And you were like, I hated it. And I was like, oh, this guy sucks. And then you were like, I'm kidding. I liked it. I loved it. And I was like, oh, okay. Just kidding. He doesn't suck.
You weren't familiar with the Chris joke yet.
No. I didn't understand his complex sense of humor.
It's very complex.
Yeah. Anyways.
It's been 10 years and you still haven't caught on, so.
I'm getting better. Anyway, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, anyway, we were all at the same screening of Iron Man. And I think if you guys remember my very outspoken thoughts at the trailer for Iron Man, you'll remember that I was not looking forward to that movie at all.
Yes.
At that time, Robert Downey Jr. was pretty unproven. I liked him in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, but he was still kind of, I guess in what do you call that? Like Hollywood blacklisted a little bit because of his behavior.
Yeah. He was still in like the negative sort of like downfall,
right?
Or like windfall, I guess, from his
90s
days.
Yeah. So anyway, I was probably the most skeptical that movie would be good, and I ended up liking it quite a bit. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think we all kind of left the theater pretty high on Iron Man at the time. And then
pleasantly surprised at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. And then there was the whole rumor for a few years of whether or not they'd be able to make the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it was all that. And then there were some hits and misses. I'm not big on Thor. I don't hate it as much as I think you do, but
right.
But I like Captain America. You know, I would say I like most of the movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's some ones I really don't care for. I'm not big on Iron Man 2 or Iron Man 3. I don't like Thor 2. I'm not big on Ant-Man or Doctor Strange too much. But for the most part, I find myself having a good time with these movies. And I think they're well made, and I enjoy the world building quite a bit. Overall, I would say I enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole more than I enjoy any individual movie in it. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a pretty fun thing to do. It's a fun thing to go with your friends who are also looking forward to the movies, like appointment viewing where you're like, all right, the new movie's coming out, let's go see it.
Is that why you won't go with me? Because I'm not as excited to see?
Well, also friends. I said friends.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that one, too. All right, continue.
Yeah, so it's like a TV show, I think. I think it probably even harkens back to the serials, you know, when you'd go to the theater and watch Flash or whatever. So I really enjoyed it. It's something you don't have to think really hard about, but for the most part, it's really fun to watch. And yeah, it's a good popcorn movies, I think.
Right, and also it's kind of fun to be in on the conversation. You know, if you're into podcasts and you're into that kind of thing, these movies are a big topic of conversation for a few months, you know? So It's something every year that you can kind of get on sync with everyone else and participate in the fun.
Exactly.
Right. So I guess until they start getting regularly bad,
yeah, and I think
I'm enjoying that.
Yeah, and I think the opposite is actually happening. I mean, in my opinion, like the first string of movies, Iron Man was good, but that first string of movies was not great to me.
I would argue that Phase 2 was the roughest. That's when you get like Thor 2, Iron Man 3.
But I enjoyed Iron Man 3.
What? Okay.
I enjoyed aspects of Iron Man 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it more than Iron Man 2.
Yeah,
I liked it more than Thor or the Avengers.
I like the Avengers quite a bit, but...
Yeah, the Avengers is really good, I think. So, Justin, you kind of have told us a little bit about the movies you've seen, but what do you think about it? Like, tell us a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth on that.
Yeah, so I think it was with the Avengers, I started to get sort of burnt out on it, even though they're coming like a lot heavier now, and you would think maybe the burnout came later. But I just remembered what happened with the Avengers was it's like, well, let me back up a little bit to like Iron Man and the first Captain America, which are the two that I really like. You know, I think like with those I was getting to meet these characters and like their origin stories were working, and I feel like every movie for each character beyond like those original like origin stories where we meet the character, see where they came from, every movie after that has kind of been lackluster to me. Like it's been lacking things that I wanted, and I think maybe because like the story of someone normal becoming a superhero is interesting to me, but once they're superhero and it's just them doing superhero things, I struggle to connect with that more. That's what I think it is. That's like my guess, right? So like that's why like starting with the Avengers, I wasn't that into it, and I think that goes to the fact that I didn't like the first Thor very much, was because he was already like a super person. You know, he was already a god in a sense. Does that make sense? Like, and I guess also I liked Guardians of the Galaxy. I haven't seen Ant-Man or Doctor Strange yet.
I don't recommend them. If you find, well, I mean, I don't know. Then again, both of those movies are both origin stories, and that seems to be apparently what you like more than when they're already in like full swing hero mode. I'm kind of the opposite. I'm with you that I really liked Iron Man. I thought Captain America was great. I think Thor is very, very okay. The first time I watched it, I enjoyed it. Watching it again, when I watched all the Marvel movies again, preparing for Infinity War, I was bored out of my mind. So yeah. I don't think it holds up upon rewatching, very well. But I think it's fine for what it is. I think Thor 2 is terrible.
Yeah. And something I haven't said, but we've said in like past episodes, but for new listeners, let me reiterate. But I've always kind of been of the opinion that the Marvel movies kind of have a sliding scale of like never getting, like if you were rating movies 1 to 10, they never really get worse than a 4 and they never get better than a 7 for me. So like even when I talk about liking Iron Man or Captain America, it's probably like, it's like a strong 7 out of 10, right?
Sure,
and
but a 7 out of 10 is a decent score. So,
it is, and I like those movies.
Right, so
for sure. And Thor, I totally agree. Like Thor for me was like a straight 5. Like it was super okay. Like, and I've only seen it the one time, if I remember correctly. If I watched it again, I don't remember, so that's probably not good.
Sure. But what I would say is I think right about the time you stopped watching the MCU is probably about the time, in my opinion, that it started getting more interesting. I think there's some rough patches in Phase 2 with like Thor the Dark World and in my opinion, Iron Man 3, although that one's debatable because it's okay. Then all of a sudden you had Captain America the Winter Soldier, which I think is one of my favorites. I think Winter Soldier is really, really good. I think Avengers 2 is no good. So I think most of Phase 2 is pretty rough. But Guardians and Winter Soldier, I think, help boost it, in my opinion, into something worth your while.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting with the origin story. I think I'm kind of origin storied out. You know, I don't want to see Spider-Man's parents die again, or Batman's parents die again. So on that level, I enjoy these news stories as opposed to origin stories. I'm glad in the Spider-Man Homecoming they don't necessarily tell his origin story because they've done it, 5 times in the last 10 years,
Right.
Sure, but Iron Man and Captain America, the first Avenger, were the first ones. So like I agree, like the Spider-Man reboots, I don't remember what they were called, with Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker.
Mm-hmm. Blah.
I didn't like those either.
The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2.
Yeah, because I agree, like I don't want to see that origin story again, but a new superhero origin story that I haven't seen before, I haven't heard before, like that interests me.
You should try Ant-Man then.
Yeah, you should try Ant-Man and Doctor Strange then, because that's the exact opposite of how I felt. Like, I wasn't a big fan of either of those movies for that very reason. I actually really enjoyed how they introduced Spider-Man and the Vision in Civil War and in Age of Ultron. And Scarlet Witch, they introduced her in Age of Ultron. I enjoy just introducing characters in the movie before, and I don't necessarily care about the origin as much. But that being said, if you like those origin stories, I think you should try Doctor Strange, because I think that was most people who didn't like Doctor Strange. I think that was their problem, is because they weren't ready for, they were like, we're bored with origin stories, give us a progression of story. So I think that's why I think my favorite movie in the whole cinematic universe is Civil War. And I think it's because that movie could not exist without all the movies before it and all those origin stories and all those separate adventures. And I really enjoy that the cinematic universe just assumes that you're keeping up and they're not going to explain things or explain that a character was introduced in Age of Ultron when they just assume you know it. I appreciate the world building that they've done so far and not having to retread.
Civil War definitely feels like a season finale, right? Like it's a climax to a series of movies, right? Because we've had these other movies that have come before, Civil War makes more sense, and we understand the other characters, and it's a culmination, somewhat like what I hope the Avengers is going to be, the Infinity War.
Right. Well, I think Avengers Infinity War will be more interesting because of Civil War. Because now that Civil War has ended the way it did, we now have Steve Rogers and Tony Stark on opposite ends of the map. They're not communicating right now, and they're going to need to communicate in order to deal with whatever's coming in Infinity War, So I think it was really smart the way it was all laid out, the way Marvel did it.
I agree.
And like stuff like, they were preparing for Black Panther way back in 2015 with Age of Ultron, They introduced Wakanda and Andy Serkis's character and the Vibranium and all that stuff. I don't know. I really appreciate that. And if I had been a little kid when these movies came out, oh man, I can't even imagine how much I would have loved that. So I really appreciate what Disney and Marvel has done. We no longer think about movie franchises in terms of like trilogies. Before Iron Man, it was like, oh, hopefully this movie gets a trilogy and hopefully the third one doesn't suck. Marvel has blown that all out of the water now. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have just trilogies anymore. Like, I think Iron Man is one of the most interesting characters, but if you watched just Iron Man 1, 2, and 3, most of those movies suck. You know, most of the best Iron Man content is in non-Iron Man movies. You know, you get most of the best Iron Man content in Civil War and in Homecoming, the Spider-Man movie. So I really appreciate that aspect. It keeps me wanting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Justin, you just recently watched Age of Ultron and Civil War. After watching those, what are your thoughts going into Infinity War? Are you more excited, less excited, or do you have any questions about it? What are your thoughts on...
I'll back up just one movie, even though we kind of already covered it a little bit, but just a brief refresher. I watched Thor Ragnarok, which obviously isn't as big as Ultron and Civil War in terms of like the amount of characters. That one's very...
But
like,
how
Thor
else will you know where
centric.
his haircut and his eye patch came from?
Exactly. So with Thor Ragnarok, just to be brief, I found that one like very, very excruciating to get through. Like that one was probably the hardest movie to watch. Like that's the one that's probably the 4, maybe even breaking new ground for Marvel and like hitting like a 3 out of 10 for me. But I'll probably say 4 out of 10. So I found that one pretty tough to get through. So when I watched Avengers 2, Age of Ultron, I was actually pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to watch. Like for me, it was just fine. Like probably like a 6 out of 10, you know, it was super watchable. And I think it was like 2.5 hours long, like every other movie, right?
It's a journey. Yeah, no, it's long. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the next night or 2 nights later, I watched Civil War. And while I didn't have as tough a time as Thor Ragnarok, I don't think it's bad. Like I struggled on Civil War to get through it.
Oh
like,
man, I love that movie. Oh, I wouldn't say I love it. That's a bold statement, but
sure.
What's your favorite?
Yeah, it's my favorite in the MCU. Yeah, for sure. So anyway, proceed, and we'll talk about it in a minute.
I mean, I agree with what you were saying about how they're setting up like Infinity War with it, and Infinity War is going to be very interesting because of what they did in Civil War, and that made me start to think that maybe it suffers because it's kind of bridging the gap between Ultron and Infinity War, right? Like it's almost setting the landscape up. So it's got that like
world building aspect to it.
Yeah, that weird thing where like not necessarily a lot of like super interesting stuff happens. It's more just like developing and like getting all the chess pieces
in the right places.
The right places.
Sure.
Yeah, it's so funny because I have the exact opposite feeling. So yeah, a lot of stuff got added into Age of Ultron, and that's ultimately why, from my understanding, Joss Whedon quit the series, because there's a lot of stuff that they had to shoehorn in there. Whereas Captain America: Civil War felt like they were telling a solid story about, you know, Captain America and Iron Man, and I thought that was interesting stuff. I mean, teach their own, but it's funny how I just have the exact opposite feeling about the movie.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with Chris. I hear what you're saying, in that you're not wrong, and that it's definitely setting up the pieces for Infinity War. There's no denying that. However, I think I'm with Chris in that it feels a little less obvious than in Age of Ultron, setting up the pieces. But that doesn't matter to me so much. What I like about Civil War is it's entirely about character. Sure, I mean, there's a big airport fight where a bunch of superheroes fight each other, and ultimately that means nothing. It's just a lot of movement and fun. But the parts at the beginning, when you have Tony Stark and Steve Rogers and all the other Avengers in a room debating whether or not they should agree to government oversight with the United Nations, and the repercussions for all the city destroying that they've done in the movies prior to this one, I found that to be fascinating. And in this one, there's no silly stakes. We don't have to worry about a city being destroyed. It's all about the Avengers themselves. And I don't know, I kind of appreciated that. I felt like it was, at the same time, it means less, like the stakes are lower than any of the other like Avengers movies or Marvel movies. But at the same time, that makes the stakes all the more interesting.
Well, I feel like the stakes are personal as opposed to
right.
like world ending.
Right. And I find myself actually genuinely attached to Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. Like, I really enjoy the way Chris Evans plays Steve Rogers. I find he's got the right kind of like humility, and I don't know. I really enjoy it, and I always hated Chris Evans prior to the first Avenger.
Right, and I feel that way about Tony Stark, but I actually don't feel that for whatever his name is. What is it? John Rogers, right?
No, Steve Rogers.
Steve Rogers. John Rogers is a friend of ours. And not Captain America, unfortunately.
Shout out to him. Although, he's Captain America in my eyes, John. Wink.
He's Sergeant America, which
at least.
I hope is that higher than Captain? Because I'm just trying to outdo you.
I don't know. Lieutenant
General
America.
Yeah, General America, sure.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways.
So you feel nothing?
So going back,
okay, hang on. Is it Chris Evans's performance, or is it the Captain America hero in general? That's crazy to me.
I think it's just
he's so
beyond.
He's just so nice.
Well, yeah, he's nice. I mean, but someone nice in a movie doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to care about him. Like, I really liked the first Avenger and his human story before he got injected, and even after, like, I found it very interesting, like all the way through like the credit scenes where he wakes up and he is all of a sudden in this strange world and like in Times Square, because for some reason they're keeping him right outside of Times Square.
I would argue he has the most interesting human story even after his superhero-ness.
He does, but I guess it just never clicks with me in any of these other movies, and it may be just because he's like a small piece of like everything they're doing, and nothing's too focused, which is, I don't know, where I get a little worried about these movies is that there's just more and more characters coming in, and we're spending less and less time with each one, right?
Right.
But let me go to the point that you made about them talking about dealing with like the government oversight of the Avengers and whether or not that's a good thing, and having to deal with like the repercussions. That stuff I found super interesting too, and those are super interesting concepts. But I also feel like they gave me those concepts on like the surface, and then just kind of went off about the movie when then fought in an airport and whatnot. You know, like I didn't feel satisfied enough. It's like they sprinkled some like water on my lips, just enough to like make me thirsty or appetize me, and then didn't like give me a full drink or you know what I mean, like give me a full meal and so satisfy my hunger that they made me feel. So it was kind of like they made me want to. I'm going to use like 3 or 4 analogies, I guess, but it's kind of like they made me want a Coke, and then they like gave me a Diet Coke.
What you're saying is you wanted 2 hours of them debating in the UN whether or not and diving into the details, and I'm just giving you a hard time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It doesn't have to just be that, I guess, but like just going deeper rather than it being very surface level, I guess.
Sure, and I would agree with that, but I would also say that none of the other Marvel movies up to that point have given you any of that. So it's hard to fault Civil War for not going far enough whenever the other movies didn't venture into this territory at all. So it's like saying, you gave me something that's more interesting than I found in any of the other Marvel movies, with like discussion about the state of the world and politics and philosophy and where each person stands. But you didn't go far enough. But I looked at it more as I was happy they went there to begin with, that we even got a conversation like that in a Marvel movie. Not so much, you gave me something that was really interesting but didn't go far enough. Yeah,
and I can understand that. I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad or makes it a bad movie because they didn't, but it's kind of the thing that
you were left
I
wanting.
felt unfulfilled. Yeah.
It was frustrating.
And sure, frustrating, and just kind of waiting for more of that. And I don't know, when it didn't come, I guess it was just disappointed. Yeah, it's just disappointing. I'm not mad.
Well, let me ask you this: as far as you said you like Iron Man quite a bit, Tony Stark. Did you find the character work and the finale of Civil War to be interesting with like Tony's parents and Bucky?
I guess I'm just not invested enough, or like haven't been watching enough of the movies or watched them like recently enough that it's all been so long that
that's
what's
interesting.
Going on with Tony's parents didn't work for me, or didn't do anything for me.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting to me because I'm actually really invested in that whole story, right? So like we meet Tony's dad in the first Avenger, and then somewhere along the way they casted, I think in Iron Man 2, they casted John Slattery from Mad Men as old Howard Stark. And then they've brought him back for a couple movies. Like they brought him back in Ant-Man and maybe another movie here and there. And so whenever in Civil War they finally retired that character or showed how Howard Stark met his end, I even had an emotional attachment to Howard Stark for a bit. And through my emotional investment in Tony, I found it very interesting from a character perspective, because this is like the one thing that you can understand why someone like Tony would lose his temper, because it's not that he killed his dad, it's that he killed his mom. And so that's like a character moment that could be in any kind of movie. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Marvel movie, and we would understand that character's motivations. I think Civil War to be the most interesting for character reasons. Because if you're going to look at this, like Chris was saying earlier, as a TV show, sometimes the episodes where characters are built up are way more interesting than episodes where plot is moved forward.
Yeah. Plus, the airport scene, I like a lot.
I like the reveal of Spider-Man in it.
Yeah, Spider-Man, and then I liked Ant-Man getting bigger and smaller. I thought that was fun.
Oh yeah, I thought Paul Rudd was really charming in that scene.
Yeah.
Yeah, except when he got all big, because then he wasn't charming Paul Rudd anymore. He was just like big, slow.
But he was laughing all goofy, and he had his eyes really big. And when he grabbed, was it War Machine that he grabbed? Like Don Cheadle? And he's like laughing because he like blew. I don't know. So yeah. I don't know.
He's a saving grace for Ant-Man.
Yeah, exactly. I hear what you're saying, but I think they've got enough charismatic leads to where the shortcomings aren't necessarily lost on me, but I'm willing to overlook them a little more because, I don't know, I enjoy hanging out with these people.
And so one movie we haven't really mentioned too much has been Black Panther, which is the most recent Marvel installment. And I just wanted to say that we do have an episode on Black Panther. So if you want to know more in detail, like our thoughts on that, I would say go back and listen to that one. But I think we all generally kind of liked Black Panther. Like for me personally, it's probably my third favorite of the Marvel movies, behind Iron Man and First Avenger.
Yeah, I think it's probably up there in my top 5 for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, gentlemen. So a little bit about the guys directing Infinity War and whatever Avengers 4 is going to be called. Those are the Russo brothers. They got their start in Community, like directing episodes of Community. And they also directed Winter Soldier and Civil War, which for Justin does not bode well for for his probable feelings on Infinity War. But I was actually looking at some interviews with them because they were saying they had a whole bunch of characters they had to juggle in this movie. So they had a lot of tones because Guardians have a different tone than Captain America, who has a different tone than Black Panther, and so on and so forth. So they were kind of talking about how they wanted to balance the tones and all these different characters and all these different groups because the Avengers are going to be sectioned off in, various places throughout most of Infinity War, I'm sure. So they talked about how they looked at movies like 2 Days in the Valley as inspiration, or I believe at one point they mentioned Robert Altman for Nashville. So I thought that was pretty interesting because they're actually taking a look at some pretty classic movies for film nerds as inspiration, at least structure-wise, for juggling this many characters. And personally speaking, that makes me feel a little better, knowing that these guys aren't just big fans of popcorn movies, that they're looking towards some of the great movies like Nashville for stuff like this. What do you think?
I would be curious to know if they did the same thing for Civil War, because I feel like Civil War and Age of Ultron and what I think Infinity War is going to be aren't really that different. Like Civil War to me is barely deserving of like the Captain America in front of the colon.
No, it might as well feels like an Avengers movie. Yeah, I think most people in their own like head canon consider that to be the real Avengers 3.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. And so I'm wondering if there will be a noticeable difference between Infinity War and Civil War, or if they were looking at some of these films beforehand. And it actually, like, hearing that makes me wonder if in a way I might be looking at these movies in the wrong light. Like maybe I should consider them more like Altman movies, and how they're less about plot and story, even though these have plenty of plot and story. But part of the Altman thing a lot of times is like the setting and the aesthetic of the movie and the vibe. Like Nashville's more about the town of Nashville than like the individual characters. So maybe looking at these movies differently, like maybe it'll open up a new way of viewing these Avengers movies.
I mean, it could. in the actual interviews with the directors, one thing they were talking about that was really important to them was balancing tone. So,
Right.
meaning like Tony Stark and the tone that Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau created in 2008 is not the same thing as the tone that Chris Evans is doing, or isn't the same thing as what Paul Bettany's doing as the Vision. So, or the Guardians. The Guardians have never been with the Avengers before. Or now that Thor has his, remake or his remodel after Thor Ragnarok, and he's more comical now, they had to balance that tone, So in it, they were saying that at the script level, they had to be very sure that everything was good before filming. And I think that's actually really interesting to think about, because whether you like superheroes or not, just from a technical standpoint, there are so many characters, and it's such an ensemble piece that I think it's fascinating, I guess, hearing how they begin to approach something so massive and what their inspirations were. And as someone who likes Robert Altman and Nashville, I actually have never seen 2 Days in the Valley, but I like big ensemble movies like that. So I think going in and looking at it from that perspective probably could only enhance the experience.
Maybe so. I would hope that with every movie, they're making sure the script is good before they start filming.
Sure. But what I think they meant was, because there are so many different characters and tones, that
the tone balance was good.
Yeah, that they had to make sure the tone balance was there at the script level before they even set out to shoot, which again is probably common sense, but is probably easier said than done when dealing with this many characters and personalities and trying to fit it in all in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's a task, and so far for me, I think they've got room to improve at the very least.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what they do, and I think that the Nashville and stuff like that is interesting as well. Like kind of their cornerstones that they're taking, to lay down the path and what they want the movie to be like is very interesting.
So let me ask you, gentlemen, and actually we'll start with Chris, because I feel like his requirements would be easier. Chris and Justin, what would it take for Infinity War for you to leave blown away? What would it take to sell you on this? What do you want from it? You may not get it, but right now, before you see it and before you're too close to sitting down in the theater to see it, what would be the culmination of the MCU so far to be a payoff worthwhile?
Well, I think they have to do some work on Thanos. For me to care about Thanos as a villain is probably what they need to do to make me extremely happy. They've had a villain problem, the whole time. If I care about Thanos, then I'll be blown away. And I actually also listened to an interview with Christopher McFeely, I think is the name of Stephen McFeely and Christopher Marcus, who wrote it. And they talk about it being an origin story. There you go, Justin. For Thanos himself. So that would be interesting. If I leave the theater caring about Thanos, then I'll be blown away.
Yeah, I've actually heard similar things, that this movie actually has a lot of Thanos in it. It's an Avengers movie, but it's also a Thanos movie.
And it has to.
Even in the trailers, you see a flashback of him and Gamora as a little girl.
Right.
Which is interesting.
They've been teasing Thanos for so long now that he better pay off big, Yeah,
and I think they know that, actually. I don't think I think their villains have gotten more interesting. I would argue that Michael Keaton in Spider-Man was a fantastic villain.
Spoilers. Justin hasn't seen it yet.
Well, Michael Keaton's in the movie, and you know that Spider-Man doesn't have any prominent male figures in his life besides Tony Stark, so...
Oh, no, that wasn't the spoiler I was thinking of either, so we're okay.
Yes, I'll jump off of that and go into the things that I want to see or that would make me very happy with the movie.
Okay.
Mainly because I agree with that point. I want to see them build off of what they did with the villain in Black Panther, which to me was the best villain that they've had so far, which was Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah, Killmonger. He was great.
Yeah. Oh, did he have a superhero name?
Yeah.
Or a supervillain name?
Killmonger.
Oh, I didn't even
That was
know
his
that.
last name. That was just his name.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. That was his last name.
That was not his last name.
I'm looking it up now.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, Black Panther had a great villain, and that's one of the reasons I like the movie. a lot more than the most recent Marvel films. And I would like to see that continue. I would like to see more good villains, right? And so that's one thing. I agree with that. The other thing that I think I would really like to see, and it's something we've already touched on, is the balance in tone, or the balance between characters being funny or not funny. Like, not every character needs to be funny. And that was a big problem that I had with Age of Ultron, is that it seemed like they were trying to make like every character have at least like one funny line, or one line that they could throw in the trailer that would be funny if they needed to, or everyone seemed to be kind of quippy, right?
Right, I hear what you're saying. Also, I want to caveat and say, Chris, you were right. I looked it up on IMDb. His name was Eric Killmonger, and that is stupid, but that is his name.
I take back everything I said about him being a good villain.
Yeah, lame. Just kidding.
But
proceed, Justin. Everyone's too funny, or trying to be too funny.
Yeah. It's like it feels like there needs to be a certain amount of humor in the script, and I understand that, but like, pick and choose your moments better. I think like the worst example that I can think of is in Age of Ultron. It's in like the big climactic battle scene, and Scarlett Johansson, Black Widow, she comes riding in on a motorcycle, and Captain America has dropped his shield, and she leans down to pick it up, and she says, "I always have to clean up after you boys," and it's pretty bad, right? And that's like, I feel like that's happening a lot in these films. So I would like to see them do some restraint. Like that was the big thing with Thor Ragnarok too, is that the humor wasn't working for me. So I just want to see them show some restraint, show some like ability to choose when the right moment is and what's the right character to have that moment, and not just have every character.
So I kind of feel like that's what these movies are, though. They are quippy. They're going to have these like one-liners. For me, it's just lean back, don't think too much about the one-liners. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they land, and sometimes they don't. And if they don't, you just move past it and, kind of, like it's just, I feel like that's what these movies are, essentially.
Well, I hear what you're saying, because I don't disagree a lot of times. But I also don't think it rubs me the wrong way as much as it rubs you the wrong way.
Yeah, it just makes the characters feel too samey a lot of the time.
Right. Well, I feel like that's, in my opinion, I don't think Thor Ragnarok counts because that movie set out to be a comedy. But I agree with you on Age of Ultron, and I think that was Joss Whedon's voice getting a little too samey as the first Avengers. And I think that's just what Joss Whedon does in everything that Joss Whedon does, right? Everyone has to be really quippy and funny. And I feel like that's gotten better since Age of Ultron. I mean, you have a little bit of that in Civil War, but I don't think it's quite as egregious as the Joss Whedon humor. I feel like that was just his trademark. Because I feel the same way in Firefly and Serenity at times. I like both of those things, but I'm not as crazy about them as I guess a lot of people on the internet are, because I don't think they're quite as funny as everyone else does. But that's okay, because not everything has to land. But anyway, long story short, I agree with you, but I feel like they've gotten better, with the exception of Thor Ragnarok, which was a straight-up comedy. So
yeah, I don't know. I would agree that I didn't notice it as much in Civil War, so I'm hopeful that those things will happen with Infinity War.
So what about you, Mike? What would blow you away from Avengers Infinity War?
I agree with you. I want Thanos to actually end up being an interesting character. They've built him up, especially in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, quite a bit. I think because of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, I think if anyone's going to take down Thanos, it's got to be Gamora, because she's the one who's his daughter. And between Guardians 1 and 2, she has the most emotional stakes tied directly to Thanos. But I also, if I'm being realistic, don't think Thanos is going to go down in this one. I think Thanos is going to win, and I think it's going to be like an Empire Strikes Back kind of ending, and it's going to go out on a downer note.
Yeah, with that, do we want to move into predictions for what we think is going to happen with Avengers Infinity War?
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, I think first off, I think you're right. The war is never going to end. Look at the title.
Yeah, it's going to go on for infinity.
That's true.
So he won't go down.
Justin, you're stealing my thing, man. The bad jokes.
Yeah. I had to try one every now and then.
So what do you think is going to happen from the most recent movies that you've watched?
Captain America's beard will seduce Thanos.
Yeah.
I was going to destroy the Earth, but your beard is so magnificent that I won't.
And handsome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, I guess the stakes will be smaller in a sense. I think that the world isn't going to be at stake, because somewhere in the trailer he says that half the people in the world are going to be destroyed. So,
I think it's half the
only
universe.
Yeah, half the universe.
So like I think
Oh, okay. So that could include the entire
I don't really
world.
understand it, but from what
I don't either.
I gather from the trailer is he snaps his fingers, and it's not necessarily like a geographical sense of like I'm gonna wipe out the closest half to me. I think it's like he snaps his fingers, and then a random half of all the content in the universe dies. But then again, I have no idea. That's just literally speculation based on the line in the trailer.
Yeah, honestly, I really don't know like enough. Like I don't have enough of it in my head like well enough, even though I just watched the other ones. Like
Sure. And I actually have some theories, so
watching the trailer, like at a certain point my eyes kind of glaze over with like all of the characters that are going on and like just the sheer number, and I start thinking about like there's so many characters in this movie, and I think I miss just plot and and things that they're telling me in the trailer, because I don't really know what to expect at all.
That's how I feel in Michael Bay movies. I remember when I was watching Transformers 2, about an hour and a half into that movie, I stopped watching the movie and I just imagined in my brain like a dollar sign in the bottom of like the screen and like how much this movie cost. So like I was just thinking like every frame I want to know how much this goes up by like hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. But so yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like when it becomes too much and you just have to take a step back and like what am I watching?
Yeah. So I don't really have much prediction, friend. What about you, Chris?
Mike, since you have the theories, why don't you tell us the theories and we can kind of talk about those?
Okay, so these theories I've pretty much just come across poking around Reddit and various things like that. So, you know, if these sound stupid to comic book nerds, you know, don't at me on Twitter. I don't care. We have Infinity War coming out in a couple days. In June, we have Ant-Man and Wasp. Then next February, we have Captain Marvel, which takes place in the 90s. And then next May, we have Avengers Part 4. We know, based on interviews with people involved in the movie, that Avengers 3 and 4 were once originally planned to be a two-parter, but then they decided to become two separate movies. I seriously doubt that it's going to not feel like a two-parter. Like, I have a feeling it's going to feel like Infinity War Part 1 and 2.
Isn't that the purpose of making this like a continuing franchise? Is like every film is a part, whether you put part 1 or part 2.
I think so, but I think this is going to be like it's going to feel like a to be continued at the end of this movie. You know what I mean? Like more so than the other ones so far. Even though they're saying it's not, my theory is that like the Avengers, most of them will die. And then Avengers 4 is going to be time travel throughout the MCU as we've known it so far to correct past events. And so there are theories that Captain Marvel, since it takes place in the 90s, she's going to go to space, encounter a couple of characters that were in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, get involved in the Civil War that's referenced in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, and then at the end of that, time travel or something will happen to where she pops up right in time for Avengers 4, and Ant-Man will find her somehow, and he will be the one to bring her into Avengers 4 to save the day, basically. She will be like the device that solves the dilemma at the end of Avengers 3, at the beginning of 4, I think.
Do you think that we'll get the same Avengers? Like the Avengers are going to no longer be dead and they're all going to be back?
I think so.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, we know that Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans have both said that they're done. You know, money can always change people's minds, so who knows? But what I would guess is that maybe at the end of Avengers 3, and everyone can laugh at me in a couple of days when this is totally wrong, but at the end of Avengers 3, I have a feeling that Tony Stark and Steve Rogers are going to have to come together again because they've been split apart by Civil War. And those are the two main characters in the franchise that I think people care about. So you got to get those two back together again, but I don't think it's going to happen in this one. Either everyone's going to die and those two are going to have to work together to try to save the day and we'll have to wait for Avengers 4 to see how they do it. Or they're not going to be able to save the day. It's going to look terrible. And then in Avengers 4, they'll reconcile again. But either way, I think the heart and soul of the MCU so far and the culmination that Marvel has been bragging about all revolves around those two characters, in my opinion. Because from my perspective, those are the only two with any kind of emotional weight behind them. And they were also the focus of Civil War, you know?
Right.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I think that it's just going to be a little bit more of a complete movie. I mean, there will be threads left hanging, but I think it won't be necessarily Empire Strikes Back to be continued. That's just my guess. I don't know. We'll see here in a couple of days. But I think we have some feedback questions, right, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple listeners actually sent in their questions about Infinity War. So first, at MWTM Podcast, which is Movies with the Misses, they asked, we are eagerly anticipating only one question. Will Hawkeye play a key role? And of course, anyone who knows anything about Avengers so far knows that Hawkeye has been completely absent from all the advertising so far. In Civil War, he did mention that he had retired, but the last time we see him is, I guess, in that raft prison that, in theory, Steve Rogers broke him out of at the end of Civil War.
Yeah, I think they've actually addressed Hawkeye. I think the directors or the writers did, but
yeah,
he may not play a big role in this one. But I bet you, if he's not in this one, I bet you he's in Avengers 4 and plays a much larger role.
Do you think he'll have anything to do with getting Captain Marvel for Avengers 4? Or do you think that Captain Marvel is going to be the key to solving things in Avengers 4?
I think that Captain Marvel will also play a key role in Avengers 4. I think Captain Marvel, Ant-Man, and Hawkeye, because who knows what's happened to the rest of the Avengers, but I think those three are going to be key in the fourth one.
Yeah, I would say I don't know about Hawkeye being an integral role, but I think he'll be important in Avengers 4 because it seems like they've purposely left him out. Right. Like, the internet freaked out about him not being in the first couple posters, and they've released like 3 more posters since then, none of which have Hawkeye. So I don't think Disney's just not aware.
Right.
This seems very purposeful. So I don't know if he'll be an important part in 3, but I am confident that Hawkeye will have a part to play.
I'm going to guess he's not going to be in there at all.
There you go.
I don't think he's ever going to show up.
Hawkeye's gone.
Because
ever again?
Jeremy Renner didn't have it.
I mean, maybe
Jeremy Renner didn't feel like it.
In passing, like we might have a little scene with him, but I don't think he's going to play into the story at all. I think he retired. He came out and helped. He got imprisoned at the end of Civil War and then released.
Screw you guys.
And was like, you know what? That was a mistake coming out, and he's just going to have gone home and retired.
So we'll cut. It'll be a end credit scene. One of the Easter eggs or whatever they call them, and it'll just be Jeremy Renner.
Like
all the
fishing.
Avengers will be dead. And it'll be Jeremy Renner like fishing, sipping coffee. And he's like,
whittling.
I'm glad I didn't go. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So.
But then he'll whittle and discover an Infinity Stone or something.
in the block of wood he's whittling?
Yeah, in the block of wood.
He'll find the Soul Stone?
Yeah.
All right. So the next one is from at Peterson W. Hill. He has 2 questions. Is there any possible way that Thanos could be a decent villain? Is he too powerful for the gang? Or will it be another Civil War situation where he plays the group off of themselves? And then the second question is, Iron Man has to die, right?
So I'm going to leave that up to you guys because honestly, I don't know anything about what they've been doing with Thanos in like the Guardians movies. Like I saw the first one so long ago, I don't remember Thanos very well. So you guys take this one.
He hasn't really been in them very much. What I would say to the first question, I think they've already played off each other on their own, right? So I think you're right. The movie is going to have to be Captain America and Iron Man coming together at some point, the mending of that fence in order to combat Thanos. So I don't know that he's going to play them off each other. It's possible. And I do think that there's a possibility that Thanos is a really good villain. At least I've got my fingers crossed that he is.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I like the casting of Josh Brolin. I like Thanos in the trailer quite a bit. I have not been impressed with him through his past appearances in Guardians or Avengers 2 or Avengers 1.
He doesn't really do much. He just shows up and he's just a tease.
Exactly. And I think they're aware of that. So I think they set out with the intention of making Thanos an interesting villain. I think as a result, though, he will be too powerful in this movie, and there's no way they're going to defeat him in this movie. I have a feeling they will lose, and they will have to come together and win in Avengers 4. I have a feeling this one's going to be more of a cliffhanger than you do. They're claiming it's 2 separate movies, and it's not a 2-parter, and that may be right. But if that's the case, then this one's going to end on a downer note.
I do think that the downer note is very possible, like at a funeral or something.
Yeah, which has me excited.
With the exception of the post-credits Hawkeye scene.
Yeah.
Right, where he's retired and whittles.
And the other question was Robert Downey Jr. has to die, or Iron Man has to die, right? To which I say, sure.
A wholehearted sure.
I think that's the most fitting. Tony Stark's been dealing with his guilt. So Tony Stark, since Avengers 1, has been dealing with PTSD and guilt. PTSD led him to make the decisions that he did in Age of Ultron, where he and Bruce Banner accidentally created Ultron through the Mind Stone, and as a result he felt guilty, and then the events of Civil War happened. So I think Tony Stark / Iron Man needs a redemption arc, and I think the only way to do that would be for him to sacrifice himself or to die. I just don't think it'll happen till Avengers 4. I think that that's the only thing that could really redeem him, considering, in my opinion, he's been the antagonist of the entire series so far as a whole.
Yeah. I think Captain America and Iron Man both die. They come together and they sacrifice together.
Right.
And I think it'll happen in this movie. Yeah. So finally they come together, and especially, man, they've really been setting Bucky up to be the new captain, you know. So I think that that's a thing that happens. But we'll find out in just a few days.
Okay, and I did want to ask you guys, how do you plan on seeing this? Like, it is a 3D movie, right? And I think I read that it was IMAX, or am I mistaken on that?
There is an IMAX. I don't know if it's actually...
It in IMAX.
Did they film the whole thing in IMAX?
I think that's right. I think they filmed the entire thing in IMAX. I think Disney is pulling no punches and making this the biggest movie that's ever existed.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too, that it's all IMAX. But do you guys plan on seeing it in 3D or 2D, IMAX? Is you going to go see it opening night? Mike, what are your plans?
So I've got my tickets. I'm going to see it Thursday night, not in 3D. I care nothing about 3D, and I don't have a true IMAX around me, so I don't necessarily care about seeing one of those pseudo IMAXs and paying like an extra $5 to see a screen that's only slightly larger, you know?
Yeah, MoviePass doesn't cover IMAX.
Yeah,
that's
so
right.
Anyway, we've already got our tickets. Yeah, opening night, but not anything fancy.
Yeah, I just found out that it was filmed for IMAX, and we have an IMAX close by, so I might have to try to see it on IMAX, because I feel like seeing stuff that's shot for IMAX is so rare that you got to take advantage of it when you can.
Oh, absolutely. I remember like the best movie viewing experience almost in my whole life was seeing Mission Impossible 4 on a true, really huge IMAX screen. Like not one of those ones where you go to your local mall and they've got permission to use the IMAX name. I'm talking about like a proper
floor to ceiling.
Yeah, like a real IMAX. And seeing Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol filmed on IMAX with like the Dark Knight Rises opening, it was incredible.
Dunkirk,
that
too.
whole building sequence, yeah, I can imagine Dunkirk would be amazing too. If I lived near a true IMAX, I would see it every chance I got.
Come on down here. There's one close by, and you can stay at Justin's house.
That's true. It's like 10 minutes from my house.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
Yeah, and that being said, I'm not going to see it in IMAX unless you want to come down and watch it on IMAX, in which case I'll make the sacrifice. But if it's just me, I'm probably going to go on like Sunday, midday, go for the 2D. And
2D all the way, I think. Yeah, 3D is not.
Yeah, 3D always just
3D
bugs me. And actually, usually the IMAX comes with the 3D. There's usually, at least like when I've been, it's always been 3D and IMAX. There's no IMAX 2D option.
I think 3D has fallen out of fashion. So I think there's more available special 2D showings than there used to be.
Cool. Anybody got anything else, or is that it?
I'm excited.
That's it. We'll see you in about a week from now to go over Infinity War.
Yeah, and if you want to follow along with what we're watching next, want to let us know what you think about Infinity War, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. That's the new name. We've changed the handle at Casual Cinecast. And also you can join our Facebook group and talk film with us at facebook.com/groups/Casual Cinecast. Or if you want to email us directly, make it a bit more personal, you can email us at casualcinemedia@gmail.com.
Next week, we'll be going over Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here, starring Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, actually, that's going to be this Thursday. So as you're on your way to watch the Avengers, go ahead and pop on our podcast, and you can listen to all about You Were Never Really Here by Lynn Ramsey.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, guys. We'll talk to you later, and until next time, bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later.